Hello, welcome back to another Women in Puppetry interview. My name is Jennifer Himes, and I started this project to create a resource of inspiration and information for puppeteers everywhere. This month, our guest is Orlando-based puppeteer Jamie Donmoyer. It was a great change of pace to be able to sit down in person with my guest in the workshop at Michellee Puppets yesterday afternoon.
I'm Jamie Donmoyer.
And yes. Tell us a little bit about what you do right now. Before we get into how you got here, what do you do like today?
Today, I work full-time at Michellee Puppets, and I create events for them, and I build puppets and write shows and direct and make videos as well, short films and things. Awesome. And then I also, I'm a puppet specialist at Walt Disney World on a seasonal basis. Okay. And I also work as a digital puppeteer at, it's through the University of Miami, but it's done via Skype. And I perform avatars, and it's meant for social skills for preteen girls. So they play live, and then I perform the avatars.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that I do. And then I also...
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's like
that's cool.
It's live and
I've never heard of that before. That's really fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. And then I also am a character development specialist for Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. I teach the DreamWorks characters how to perform, like Shrek and all those guys. Wow. So I train all those characters.
Wow, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
That's a lot of different things.
Yes.
The really big question is, why puppetry? And like, where did it start for you?
Well, when I was a kid, I loved to imitate the voices of my relatives and anybody I thought had a unique voice. I had an aunt who was a lot of my relatives are from New York, and I had an aunt who talked like this, and I loved to imitate her voice, and she would always talk. So I really wanted to do voices. So I was in the gifted program, and I had to do a project for them. So it was a project I had to come up with. What do I want to do with my life, basically? Okay. And I said I want to perform voices on Sesame Street, and my mom was like, "Well, those are puppets," and I was like, "Okay," and she's like, "The puppeteers do the voices," and I was like, "What does that mean?" So there was a local lady who built puppets. And my sister was in theater, and so this lady was at the theater where she performed, and she taught me how to make some very basic puppets with like cardboard mouths and things like that. Sure. And as soon as I did that, just the 3D sculpture aspect of it, I was like, this is for me. Yeah. And so I started learning how to perform. I would just sort of watch things on television. I would watch Sesame Street. You know, I was like 11 at this point. I was still watching Sesame Street and trying to figure out, well, how are they doing that? And how would I move my hand and how would that work? Yeah. So that's what brought me to puppetry. And then, of course, my father was Google before Google existed. He could find anything. And so awesome. He heard I was interested in puppets, and he went and looked in the local, I lived in Philadelphia area. Okay. And the Philadelphia Area Puppetry Guild was there. And so he contacted them, and Tom and Marianne Tucker of Tucker's Tales Puppets up there kind of adopted me as their puppet child and brought me into the world and showed me everything from there.
That's really awesome. And then what was your path after that? I mean, did you go to any special training, like college? Like, what was your major in college? Did that correspond with puppetry?
Well, I basically, when I was 11, I started completely with all these puppets. And so I was involved in the guild, and they would have events where these very well-known puppeteers would come and perform, and I had no idea who they were at the time. Right. And I remember Joe Kishore, who's a very well-known marionettist. He's almost like an engineer of marionette strings. He can do like amazing things with them. Was performing at one of these events, and I was just staring and thinking, what is this? What are they doing? And it was amazing. So I was like, I need to learn how to do this. So Tom and Marianne told me about the puppet festival that was happening. It was a regional festival at the University of Connecticut, and it was probably 1993 or 1994. And so my mom took me, and we went And I was opened up there. They had workshops in all sorts of puppetry. I signed up for everything that I could.
Yeah.
I went to see live shows. I sat at tables and talked to puppeteers. And so that was my first really intro into an intense kind of program with puppetry.
Okay. And you were
And
how
then
old?
I started when I was 11, but I think by that point I was probably like 13, 14
Okay.
or so.
Okay, that's cool.
And so I went to this event and I was like, oh, I need to go to more of these. I was, it's sort of an addiction when you start with puppets.
Right, sure.
So I had taken a puppet making class at that event and was really experimenting at home on and I started making puppets of like friends of mine and my parents and, just kind of like portrait puppets, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
And so a lady named Verna Finley, who was a very famous puppet builder, and she created a lot of like ventriloquist dummy type puppets, but a soft sculpture.
Right.
I think Peanut from Jeff Dunham's character is is very similar to what her style is.
Okay.
And so she was coming to Philadelphia to do a week-long workshop in puppet building, and I was probably about 15. And so my parents let me skip school, and I stayed with the Tuckers, and they took me every day, and they took the class too, and we built basically a large-sized hand puppet with legs and arms and everything.
Right.
And that was my next thing that I did as far as building puppets, and I learned how to do that. And somewhere in there, I met a local boy who was also interested in puppetry. He was already performing his own shows and doing things like that, and he was already performing on Sesame Street. And so I went to a book signing with Cheryl Henson.
Oh, cool.
She was promoting the Muppets Make Puppets book at the time.
Okay.
And while I was there, I was in line, and this boy kind of cut in front of me. And I looked up, and I recognized him from the article I had read that was in the paper about him, and it was John Tartaglia. And so we became, like, best friends immediately. And so he taught me a ton of stuff. We would sit in his basement, and we would plan little shows, and we would obsessively watch Puzzle Place, and we would just watch it and giggle and laugh. Carmen Osbar did a character named Kiki, and we just thought that character was so funny, and we would watch how they moved the mouths, and we would do all those things. And he was already performing on Sesame Street, I think, since he was like 14 or something.
Wow.
But he introduced me to Sesame Place, and I started working there as Oscar the Grouch. And I did that for, I think, 2 or 3 summers. And basically, it was a huge fiberglass puppet. And it was heavy, and you had to wear the trash can on your body.
Goodness.
It was like straps on your arms, and so you would kind of crouch down, tuck your head under, and hold the puppet in, and it was like a live hand, and then your hand was kind of strapped to the inside of the puppet because it was heavy. And the bottom of the can was open so you could walk, so you had to make sure you had everything on tightly. And then you would land on your knees, and you would lift the can lid, and you would bring the puppet up, and you would, do the whole thing. And that was really fun. I really learned how to work as an ensemble in that show. That was a big training ground for, not only just how to train my hand to sustain that amount of performance, but to really watch out for each other. I had to learn choreography. It was standing and sitting and kneeling and doing all these things.
Right, yeah.
So there was that. And
cool.
So that was high school. And so I was also still continuing with my gifted mentorship project. So I was going over the Tucker's house. They were teaching me how they built puppets. There was a lot of local puppeteers. Steve Abrams, who does a puppetry journal now, he was a local puppeteer, and he would show me little things about character voices. So I would use the Puppet Guild as sort of my learning ground.
Sure.
And then when it was time for college, I was like, there's only one place I'm going to go. I'm going to the University of Connecticut.
Yep.
This is where I want to go. And I was determined, this is where I'm going to be. I must go there because that's where puppeteers go to learn how to be puppeteers.
Right.
So when I graduated, I had only applied to one school, and I got in. But I wasn't a local student, so it was very expensive to go there.
Right.
So I went to the campus. I had been there for a puppet festival once before, and so I kind of was thinking puppet festival, as opposed to being at a college campus. I really didn't know a lot about college.
Right. Yeah.
So I went to, I started classes there, and I got there, and probably the first day of classes, my boyfriend and I, who had been doing like a long distance relationship, broke up. And, it was sort of like everything started to, when you're not supposed to be somewhere, things start telling you
Right.
you're not supposed to be
Sure.
somewhere. So
Yeah.
that happened on the first day of classes. And then part of the program at the time was that you could only take arts classes if you were a junior, and I was a freshman. So I couldn't take any puppetry classes. I couldn't take anything for 2 years. And
Oh.
they had warned me about this, but you don't really know when you're in
Right.
high school.
Yeah, you don't think
So
about it. Yeah.
I got there and I was just dying. The creativity was sucking out of me. I was taking all these core classes, English and
Right.
all these things that are important, but
Right.
not what I was there to do. So I would skip class and I would go down. At the time, it was a basement at the bottom of Sprague, which was one of the dorms, I think. And it was just a basement, and there was like 13 of us. And so I would go down to the basement instead of going to class, and I would just see what they were working on. And I met my friend Ray Kaplan, who's Ray Maxwell now, and I just must have looked so miserable. I had all my puppets stuffed into a closet in my dorm room, and I was down there, and I just must have looked so miserable. And Ray started talking to me, and she handed me a leg to carve. They were doing Sleepy Hollow at the time, and I just started carving the leg. And I think I was crying or something, and she just turned to me and she was like, this program isn't for everybody. And I was like, it's not for me. I was just like, I've got to be performing. I want to keep doing things. And, the program is fantastic. But at the time, it wasn't what I needed.
Yeah.
So I left UConn, and John Tartaglia was living in New York City at this point. And I went up and we were talking about possibly living together up there. And I was trying to look for work and doing all these things. And he found in the Puppetry Journal, someone named Jeff Conover, who's was the puppet master at Disney World and still works there in a big capacity as a puppeteer, trainer, and more on the engineering side of things, I think now. He had written an article about needing puppeteers at Walt Disney World, and I really needed some place to work, and I really needed some puppetry experience. So I called him, and he said, well, all of our auditions currently are dance auditions. We don't have strictly puppeteer auditions, but I'll call you when we do. So it was a couple months later, and he called me and he said, would you like to come down and audition? We're going to have our first puppeteer auditions. But they're inside auditions, which basically means that people who already work here are auditioning, not people from the outside. So you had to have a special invitation. So he invited me, and I came down, and my best friend and her mom and I drove down. I was like 18, and I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. So I auditioned, and I got it, and I was up in Pennsylvania at the time. I moved from Pennsylvania to Orlando in like 2 weeks, and that was it. I was like, I'm gonna go work at Walt Disney World. So I started working at the Legend of the Lion King show, which was at the Magic Kingdom. It's no longer there. And I started doing learning how to use gigantic mechanical puppets. And someone had said to me a couple of years later, they had sort of said it in a degrading way. They were like, oh, I had to work with all these theme park puppeteers. But theme park puppeteers need to know how to do a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So it was like you're coordinating with 4 or 5 people on this giant puppet. Somebody's pushing, somebody's pulling, somebody's moving the legs, it's a lot of stuff that you have to know how to do. And it's not, I don't know where else you would practice to learn how to do this kind of stuff. You just have to do it on the job. So I worked there, and then I started doing a show called The Disney Crew, which was an anti-drug puppet show that toured the 3rd grades in Florida. So we would get in a bus or get in a van, depending on where we were going, and we would go out and we would set everything up, and it was a hand and rod puppet show. But the trick of that was that in order to audition, you had to be, I think, 5'6" or 5'7". And I'm 5'2". And so I went home and I built shoes, and I just got a bunch of foam kickboards and the tallest shoes I could find, and I just started gluing and nailing and wrapping tape and until I was 6 feet tall. And I went to that audition, and they said, no, you're too short, and I said no, and I put my shoes on, and they let me audition, and I got it. And that was my first real ensemble puppet show that was hand and rod, where other people were puppeteering, because Oscar had just been by myself, and
Okay.
everybody else was a standing character with a movable
okay.
mouth.
Okay.
So,
And that
um,
was like a local outreach?
it was local outreach. So
Okay.
it was through Disney, but
okay.
it was within Florida. So they toured to third grades. They don't do it anymore.
Okay.
But they toured to third grades, and it was an anti-drug puppet show. And I worked with some really creative people.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, Jeremy Thorpe, he's great at coming up with ideas, and we would adjust the puppets just ever so slightly to do cool things. So the cigarette puppet, we got a little a tube, and it smoked. We had the smoke come out of the top of the cigarette. You know, we added lights to different characters. You know, it got very creative, which was fun.
That's really fun.
And it was a pre-recorded track, so you learned how to lip sync to a track, and you know, kind of move and come up with creative ideas of how to make the puppets interact and stuff. And it was really fun. So there was a big audition process for Bear in the Big Blue House, because it was both Jim Henson and Disney combined. They brought Noel McNeil and Peter Linz and Tyler Bunch and Vicky down as people kind of to say, hey, this is how you perform these characters. You know, they did like trainings and things, and so you had to audition for it, and it was a lot of like audition. You know, it wasn't like just cattle call audition.
Right.
You had to be recommended as. You had to be on a list of people, and mostly it was Disney crew people because they already knew how to use hand puppets.
Thanks for watching this episode of Women in Puppetry. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, and if you want to see more, please subscribe. See you next time.